Welcome to episode 28 of Bloggers Are Weird. I am your host, DJ Paris from the blog, thoughtsfromparis.com, the YouTube show, O Sex with Karen and DJ, and the book, Holy Crap, I'm Bathing in a Rose. And we now have a mobile application for you Android and iPhone users. Go to your app stores, do a search for TFP, Thoughts from Paris, TFP Humor Blog, and you will find it. It's free. Download it, and it does a couple of things. One, pulls all my blog posts so you can read my stuff. Two, all of these podcasts you can listen to straight from the app. Number three, it shows all the videos I put together, and then it also displays my Twitter and Facebook feed. So it's all DJ in one location. Very exciting, I'm sure. I'm also like to mention I'm standing up while I'm doing this, and it is very awkward. I'm standing up, projecting, and moving my arms, and it just must look very strange. But anyway, today on the show, we have Queerie Bradshaw, who this is technically part 3, because part 2, which last week I released part 1, which was great, and part 2 got erased accidentally. In fact, it wasn't even recorded. My software crapped out while I was recording it without knowing, and she went about 35 additional minutes. We lost it. So we re-recorded, asked totally different questions this time, and went a full hour. So thank you to Queerie Bradshaw for being so understanding. This is a great hour of the podcast. So please stay tuned. Everything she has to say is very interesting, and she's just one of those smart people. One of those intellectuals who just makes me feel bad that I haven't thought anything in my life through quite as much as she's thought things through. So grab a beer out of the cooler at your family barbecue reunion like I did, except I didn't drink a beer. I had a Diet Coke, but whatever. I'm kind of lame. Anyway, grab a beer or whatever your drug of choice is. Mine are those Diet Cokes I grabbed out of the cooler, previously mentioned. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Today's podcast is sponsored by romance-text.com. Looking to reignite the passion in your relationship? You have to check out romance-text.com. This is how to use text messages to bring back the passion and reignite the spark you once had. Now, if you're thinking this sounds cheesy, or maybe it's just learning how to send dirty text messages, it's actually not. This program by relationship expert Michael Fiore has been featured in over 200 television and radio shows. This program has a money-back guarantee, is normally $97, but listeners of Bloggers Are Weird get a special price of only $47 for the entire program. By purchasing the program, you help support this show. Visit romance-text.com and get the passion back. But we ended the last show when we were talking about, and I asked sort of that typical person who's not gay question, which is, who has it tougher, gay men or gay women, or transgender or transsexual? And you sort of said, nah, that's not a great question. And you were more polite than that, but that was ultimately, I think...
Actually, I believe my actual answer was just meh, MEH.
Well, that would not be much different from anyone else I interview when I ask this question. But so here's what I was thinking this morning. I was trying to think of some questions to ask you, and then I realized, I might not know, what are the questions, or what are the conversations that heterosexual people are not having around the gay community?
I think that heterosexual people aren't having queer conversations, and the gay community is starting to trend more towards queerness versus just gayness. So, as I may or may not have said in the last podcast, queer is a more all-encompassing terminology that's used when you're trying to talk about any sexual minority, I have a friend who is in a, quote, straight relationship, but she is queer. She likes women.
Sure.
So you incorporate her to the transsexual, to the genderqueer, to the lesbian, to the gay, and it allows for a fluidity in sexuality that I feel, and I'm not saying not all straight people are not having this conversation, but I feel like a lot of the mainstream heteronormative culture is not having this fluid conversation. They want to put you in a box. There's straight marriage, there's gay marriage, there's, monogamy, That's it. Those are the only conversations that we seem to be having as a heteronormative society. And I include in that gay people who are heteronormative. You know, the white picket fence house, 2.5 children, and they just want to go to work and, you know, play and have their family. And that is perfectly okay. But if we're looking to start having conversations that are going to really expand rights and respect within sexual minorities, we need to start really having the conversations that incorporate the term queer and incorporate the words that come with queer and the ideas that come with queer.
So queer is essentially maybe the opposite of queer would be more traditionally straight. So we have traditional straight relationships, and then we have, you know, we'll call them sexual, the sexual minority, which would be everything that really, I believe just about everything that would be considered not traditionally straight. Is that accurate?
I would say that queer is any deviation from the social norm. So yeah, pretty accurate. You were pretty accurate in that. I incorporate it. I encompass and include anything that deviates from the social norm. Not everybody is that broad, but yeah, I think queer would be anything that's a little queer. You're a little queer. You're a little off, a little different.
And I've always thought that, I still will slip and call it the gay community, but I would say the queer community. But traditionally, for me, those are people that, I'm in the Midwest. That's, we're still our gay people are still very traditional here for the most part, and it is. With respect to, I completely lost my train of thought where I was going, and it was something interesting. Oh, I was going to say sense of humor. I would say maybe because of terms like queer, which has sort of a slightly humorous connotation to it in our, in our culture, that gay people seem to have an amazingly well-developed sense of humor about themselves and their culture and community. I don't know exactly why that is. Do you see that as well, or is that straight?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the things that listening to the last podcast did is I realized I kept getting excited and cutting you off, so I'm trying really hard to not do that this time. I actually think that we laugh at each other a lot, sometimes in healthy ways, sometimes not so much. But I think that we're a community that has found a way to be satirical and funny and use that to break the ice and to push through the pain of ostracism that we face. And I actually really like that. And I like that you've made that observation, because I like being part of a community that allows itself to be comical and to make fun of itself while still standing up and saying, we get to do it, but we're not really going to probably put up with you people over here that aren't a part of us doing it either.
Yeah, it's that old, line from Animal House, like, they can't do that to our pledges, only we can do that to our pledges.
Exactly. And whether or not we should be doing that to our pledges is a different story, but...
Whole nother conversation.
Yeah, but there is something to the way that we have used humor to break through situations. I mean, even if you think about, like, the drag queen persona, the typical...
Sure.
But people always think of the drag queen when they think of the LGBTQ community, and that comes from an extremism, and that's what makes it so funny. It's taking this character and building it to an extreme with the hair and the makeup and the attitude. And we kind of embrace the stereotypes that have been thrown on us because they're thrown on us for a reason. And a drag queen or a drag king is a perfect example of taking those and laughing at them and laughing with them and getting the audience to laugh with you. And at that same time, you're also making a political and social statement on them as well.
Well, sure, you had all those movies with Divine.
Divine.
Although I don't know if Divine was a positive role model for that community or not. But
I don't know. One of my best friends, she considers herself a mix between Divine and Miss Fizzle from the Magic School Bus. And
I don't know that. One.
She dresses for every adventure they go on, like a different way. And I think that actually Divine, the brazen and raunchiness and of Divine is really amazing. She doesn't apologize for being raunchy and brazen, and I actually find that you find that actually a lot in the fat girl community too, the fat positive community, embracing that stereotype of like, yeah, I'm going to be fat and brazen and loud, and that's going to be okay.
What are some of the other misconceptions that maybe the heterosexual community has, or conversations we should be having regarding queer culture and queer politics, and what are we missing? Whenever
people always ask me the question, like, what is the biggest misconception straight people have about gay people, I always say, nobody fucking scissors. It doesn't exist.
I got one. So I was at this is probably 3 years ago. I'm going to break my anonymity. I was at a 12-step program, and I walked into a meeting that was basically, with the exception of me, exclusively gay and lesbian. And that was it wasn't a meeting about gays and lesbians. It just happened to be one where they congregate for this particular 12-step meeting. And so we were walking around we were sitting around and we were going around the circle talking about what is also known as the 13th step, which I won't get into, but basically it's where new members are preyed upon by older members who have been in the program for a long time, and they basically try to get them to sleep with them. And it's this really unfortunate thing in 12-step communities that apparently I didn't know, but happens from time to time. Anyway, we get around to, and most of the people in this meeting are gay men, and then there's a few women who I would assume are lesbians. But one of them for sure was lesbian, because when it went around to them, and the question was, has anyone been preyed upon ever by somebody who'd been in the program for a long time when you were new? And the woman says, oh, honey, she goes, we're lesbians. We don't have sex. and I thought that was really fun. And the whole room exploded in laughter. So I thought.
Oh, yeah. That's a stereotype, the lesbian bed death. This idea of two older lesbians who have grown out of each other but still stay together for practical purposes and no longer have sex, and they just, maybe cuddle, maybe don't. There's this stereotype of that that's actually sadly based in reality. I think that when you see two heterosexual people in a couple that have grown apart, you find that the male push, and I hesitate to use stereotypes because I don't want to assume that men have more of a sex drive than women always, but there are studies that prove that when men aren't getting sex in their home, they tend to stray more than women do. And not that women don't stray, but men tend to do it more. So if you have two women together that are unhappy but still kind of together, they don't have sex anymore. Whereas if you have a heterosexual couple, there tends to be more sex outside of the marriage. And you also see two gay men that are together tend to, if the marriage itself has stopped having sex, they tend to go seek it elsewhere and be okay with that. Statistically speaking, these are all statistics and stereotypes, and I understand that there are exceptions to all these rules, but statistically, yeah, you have this idea of older lesbians who quit having sex, and I think so much of that has to do with settling for this idea that we as women don't need sex as much, which is actually a very common misconception that is not at all accurate.
Yeah, I've been reading, interestingly enough, about sexual polarity, and I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on this, and I'm going to try to say...
As in, like, how to have sex on the South and North Pole, because I feel like that would be really hard through all the clothes you have to wear. But
and just, whichever one's got the polar bears, staying away from getting eaten by,
that would
by
be
them.
The
North. And wherever Santa Claus is, you want to keep away from that whole scene.
Yeah, because you get involved in an elf, and, man... Yeah, bad news.
I've been reading this book for years actually, and I revisited it recently, and it talks a lot about sexual polarity and it is completely gender neutral, but it talks about masculine energy versus feminine energy, and not male versus female, but just energies, and that men can have more traditional feminine energy, and women could have more masculine, etc. And talking about how those two energies are extremely attracted to one another sexually, and how you in a very happy and successful relationship, that one person tends to be has the more masculine energy of masculine sexual energy, and the other person has more feminine. I guess this is probably nothing new, as it's been spoken about in other phrases and words. But have you ever looked at any of that as do you find that sort of polarity is true enough to be true, or do you find that in the queer community that it's not quite so much? So you have two people that are of the same gender sometimes, that is it always that one's more masculine than feminine? Obviously, always isn't it's not always going to be that way, but is that more common than uncommon?
That actually kind of, even though it seems so obvious of a way to state it, it actually kind of blew my mind, and in that I switched it to the idea that I'm always asked, who's the boy and who's the girl? And I always try to explain to people that there is no boy and there is no girl. There are two girls. Even if one looks more like a boy and one looks more like a girl, you can never judge that. And how some of the most feminine people that I've ever dated are the biggest tops. And I like the idea of thinking of it as the energy versus the presentation.
Yes.
And I could kind of run with stereotypes if I'm going with energetics, because I definitely feel like even though the presentation is completely not always a boy and a girl, there tends to be in successful relationships a more masculine energy and a feminine energy. And I could actually get behind that concept, that relationships that do best sexually have one or the other.
Yeah, there's a book I highly recommend to everyone, and the title's going to throw some people off, but the person who wrote it is really, I think, spot on with a lot of the stuff. His name's David Deida, Deida, and his book is called The Way of the Superior Man. And it, again, don't let that title throw you off, but it basically talks all about sexual polarity and how to appease and how to embrace, if you have a more masculine presence, how to use that presence to actually free the feminine energy in another person, and vice versa, and how, the feminine needs the masculine and the masculine needs the feminine. It's very, very interesting, and it's really nothing as weird as I'm probably making it sound, but it is, it's very interesting, and I just didn't know how that plays out in the, in the queer community. But
I think you actually also see it. I was just thinking when you were talking about that stereotype of the like brazen wife who pushes her husband around, and she tells him what to do in sex, heaven forbid. And I think that there is something too that, like, the woman who chased the men, and it's almost always portrayed in culture as this like large woman who's loud and screams and runs after them, and they just want the pretty blonde that sits quietly in the corner. Or maybe I've been watching too many Disney films lately. But yeah, I think that isn't just a queer thing. I think that you can find the switch of those roles in many, many relationships that are heterosexual appearing as well.
Well, and I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to meeting the needs of a partner, where, sometimes the partner, for example, I know when I've dated women who were very successful in business, they have a more traditionally masculine energy they need to expend during the day because the business world that they're in is male dominated, and that's what they need to get through the day. And then they come home, and the last thing they want to do is to be more masculine. And so they come home, and then as the man, they would like me to provide that energy so that they can embrace their femininity, or vice versa. And so it's people who, I think you're right, the role playing, it's not role playing, but the playing of the roles can switch very fluidly, and knowing what your partner needs you to step up at this moment, or needs you to back down, or needs you to take control of the situation, or needs you to, let them be and come back at a later time. But I think embracing both energies inside of all of us is really important, but also understanding where we're more dominant. Are we more dominantly masculine, feminine, and then finding somebody who can sort of fit that puzzle piece.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I also, I feel like there's that stereotype of, the woman who goes out and has to be masculine, comes home and wants to be feminine. And I think that's true in a lot of terms, and sometimes she comes home and she still wants to be masculine. But you also think of the dominatrixes are constantly feminizing and sissifying powerful men who are hyper masculine, and I like that idea of providing space for people to explore both aspects of them, because we all have, you know, a yin and yang, a woman and a man, and I like that. Like, for example, me, I have a total 1950s housewife fetish. I love being that typical housewife. Yesterday I work for a brewery on the side, and I went to a bacon and beer fest, and it was a super masculine event. And I found myself, like, I came to my crew with, like, fresh iced tea made and snacks that were healthy. And, like, I get off on, I hate cleaning house, but you put me in a dress and pearls and heels, and I will vacuum the fuck out of this place. It will be spick and span, and I will look fabulous doing it. And there's something to the gender roles that we fight them as a culture to try to not have them pushed on people. But I think we're getting back to a point where people are saying, okay, I want to accept this aspect of it. I can, as long as I personally feel like my partner doesn't expect me to be that little wife, I am happy to be that little wife. But the moment someone expects me to be a girly girl and all these feminine stereotypes, I don't want to be them. So I think that we're getting to a point where people aren't expecting those stereotypes anymore, and therefore people are able to explore them on both sides of the gender spectrum.
I think you're right. I did want to bring something up in a sort of complete side conversation, but I did just remember this earlier, that you stood up to a very powerful man at Blogger, or at least a perceivedly powerful man, Mr. Guy Kawasaki.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So I must have missed what you responded to, because then your session was, I think, immediately following his or right after. And I went and saw your session, and then I was like, "Oh man, I must have." I'm so used to his brazen nature that I just. Anyway, for those who aren't familiar with Guy Kawasaki, he used to be like the biggest Apple fanboy that ever existed, and he's an author and kind of a tech guru of sorts. And anyway, he is not shy about expressing his opinions about the direction of technology in any way. And you had you took issue with one or two of his statements. What happened?
So what happened was Guy Kawasaki came and talked to a room full of extremely empowered women, and you could tell he thinks of himself as someone who thinks of women equally, but the statements and the tone that he used conveyed a different idea. It conveyed this concept of talking down to us like we were people that were going to learn from him in a way that infantilized us. I think that he said comments and spoke in overgeneralized stereotypes in a way that you don't do when you come to a women's conference full of empowered women. You shouldn't do in general, but he got up there and he did okay during his speech, but when people started asking questions, he answered them in a way that was really offensive to me and other people on Twitter. And one of them being, he talked about how someone got up and said that their blog name, and he was like, women bloggers have the most, and I quoted him as saying cutesy blog names, and he actually said hilarious or adorable or some other word, but he put women bloggers in this idea of like, oh, you cutesy little bloggers, after he had just admitted that he came to this conference free of charge, and it's the only place he would do that. We are that powerful of a group of people. And then he turns it around and says, we're cute, adorable, whatever we were, we're these little bloggers with their cutesy little names, or their whatever the term was. And that's actually ended up being the problem, is that word, cutesy, that I used. So then later I continued quote him every time he made a comment that was similarly degrading. And one of them was someone asked him if he ever used Pinterest, and he said, "Oh, I don't have the right chromosomes for Pinterest." You're talking to a room full of women who make livings, lots of money off of Pinterest, lots of connections off of this amazing product. And he's degrading it, stereotyping in some horrible ways, totally dissing men that would be on there and that could actually use it popularly, and dismissing a whole massive social media arena. This coming from the guy who calls himself a social media guru, and guru being a term that has problems aside, he calls himself that, and he dismisses a whole major part of social media because he says he doesn't have the right chromosomes. And he continues to make comments like this, and I continue to tweet them out. And I'm not the only one. There are lots of people. I think my comment quoting him got like 200 retweets. It was one of the biggest comments that I had on Twitter. And then a couple other people quoted me and the same misquote. And so then it ends, the conference ends, and throughout the conversation Guy Kawasaki had, he was talking about his wonderful assistant, Peg Fitzgerald, who does everything for him and is the reason that he is so successful. And he said, "Nobody can take her away from me. She is mine." And he talked about her like he possessed and owned her. And that was something that we found problematic as well. And so after the conference, Peg Fitzpatrick, his assistant, writes a letter in the Huffington Post attacking one blogger for one comment she said, and calling her pretty much a man-hating feminist, in that she only attacked Guy Kawasaki because he was powerful and she wanted the attention. And he then tweeted this out as saying, "Was I sexist? I didn't think so, and neither did Peg, so here I'm not sexist." So this woman who got paid, she's on salary, she got paid to write this. She wrote it and put it out there and commented on it during work hours. She got paid to write how her boss wasn't sexist. And they did reach out to the blogger that he had said the one comment to, but they didn't take any time to reach out to the group of us that were like, "Hey, we don't appreciate the way you talk down to us." And instead of They had this wonderful moment where they could have redeemed themselves and said, "Hey, we are really sorry if we offended you. That wasn't what we meant. We highly respect you. That's why we're at this conference." But instead, he had his assistant attack us. And whether or not he had a say in that and what she wrote is besides the point. It's still this woman saying, "Hey, look," this man saying, "Hey, look, my assistant thinks I'm okay, so I'm therefore not sexist." Instead of taking a moment to recognize that he offended a very large group of people, a group of people he had just recently said were extremely important to him to be a part of. And it was just an example of the tech community works in stereotypes about gender, and it's such a hard place to get into for women. And to have him belittle us like that and come to our conference, he wasn't all bad. He's not purposely trying to be a sexist pig. He's not an asshole, but he missed this opportunity to better himself, and instead he bashed the people who were upset with him. And his assistant said that they need to watch what they say because it can have a bad effect on people. Instead of saying, "Hey, what I said hurt somebody and I should do something about it," he said, "You hurt me, fuck you," pretty much.
Yeah, as a humorist, I have, and I continue to, and maybe he was of the same ilk where I felt that he, for the most part, was, what I heard was, yeah, he's pro-women, and at least to the extent of his conversation that he had. However, there was some sloppy language used, and that's something that, as now I'm somewhat immersed in largely, at least with BlogHer, is largely women-oriented blogging community. I have become a lot more sensitive as a humorist to using certain language. And, for example, saying things like mommy bloggers to a large number of women is extremely offensive versus mom bloggers. And there are, and obviously you're not going to always please everyone, but just knowing that that's a big deal. And then the last BlogHer I was at, understanding that for women, this idea. I didn't know that women have women who have children have a huge, there's a huge community of women that hate other women for not breastfeeding. Then there's women that say you shouldn't breastfeed.
Yep.
And I didn't know that was a thing. I had no clue. And now I understand that I have to be very considerate in my language not to appease everyone, but to be sensitive to some of these issues and, sort of know thy audience. So.
Yeah, and I think it would all be different if he was writing some commentary somewhere or if he was speaking to a different group of people. But the irony of it was that Peg Fitzgerald's article was called "Words Have Power, Use Them Wisely," and she attacked this person for being hurt by words that her boss had said. And it was just so, I couldn't create a comedy of errors more than this PR stunt. It felt like a PR stunt, and it really went badly when they could. And also, I have friends that commented on the article, and their comments never went through, and they were pro what happened. They were pro the feminists, and they pointed out how many other people were talking, and their comments were never approved. You had to have your comment approved. And so the conversation was steered on Huffington Post in a direction that they wanted it to be steered in.
Let's talk about feminism, because we didn't really touch on that in the last, the Lost interview we'll call it, which I'm so...
I know, it had such great stuff. There was talk of the law. I think I said some shit about the Supreme Court too. I thought it's so smart.
You did. Well, we talked about gay rights and gay equality, and here's a little something that I don't know. I want to get your opinion on this. So my friend, I'll leave her name off just in case you don't like her for some reason. I don't know what the gay community in particular thinks about this, because I'm not part of the queer community. But my friend is the one who created which I think is largely associated with gay equality, at least, is that red icon with the pink equal sign.
Oh, cool.
Have you seen that? Yeah, my friend who's a cupcake person made that as a cupcake and got picked up, and now it's everywhere, and it's still everywhere. But what are from a feminist perspective, what are some misconceptions that we still have today about feminism?
That we all like cupcakes.
But doesn't everyone like cupcakes?
I think cupcakes are way overrated, especially in the feminist community. Some common misconceptions about feminists. I felt like there's this idea that I once listened to an NPR show that talked about during the 2012, I think it was, campaign. No, it wouldn't have been 2012. Whenever the last time we elected a president was, they were talking about, I guess it was 2 times ago. Anyways, it was the whole Sarah Palin, Hillary Clinton comparison, where Sarah Palin was going around saying, I'm a feminist. I believe that women should have the power to do what they want to do. Stay at home and be with kids, or I want to help, or go in politics. And she was embracing herself as a feminist in a way that Hillary Clinton could never do, because you have this evil, man-hating lesbian stereotype where we try to smash men's balls with our Doc Martens, and as a masculine liberal, more masculine presenting liberal woman, Hillary Clinton could not embrace that because it would feed everybody's stereotypes of it, whereas Sarah Palin was the opposite of it, and so she was able to fully embrace it. And there was a really great NPR show analyzing that, and it stayed with me. And I think about how me as a gay person, am so gay, but I don't want to look like that kind of gay. I don't want to be that gay. I don't want to be that feminist. I don't want to be that uppity, because we've taken these ideas of feminism and expanded them into stereotypes, and we push against them because we've been told that they're wrong. And so I think that one of the biggest misconceptions of feminism is that you have to be this brutal brouhaha person who never shuts down, who doesn't talk to men, who hates the patriarchy constantly, who does all these things, that you have to be that image of the 1990s queer core feminist Annie DeFranco era versus being a feminist in your own way now. And but I also feel like we've taken this misconception to heart and we've silenced ourselves. So we don't want to be the man-hating lesbian over here, a stereotype, wearing her Doc Martens and not shaving her legs, but we also don't really want to be like the 1950s housewife, and we don't really know how to be in the middle. And I think the common misconception is that you have to be one or the other, where in reality there's such a fluidity in feminism that I think is okay to embrace. And it's okay to be skeptical about calling yourself a feminist and to not really know what it means to be a feminist, because I don't think that we've defined it well in recent years.
Yeah, let's if we can, let's do our best to define it, because I was just thinking that right before you said it. And I don't know that feminism is about equality, because I don't think, as genders or as energy, we might want to call it, I don't know that we should maybe equalize that. But I love the idea of the feminine independence, and I like the idea of, without attempting to be controlled by a different type of presence. That's when I think feminism, I think of more of an independence, free of oppression and stuff like that.
I think that feminism will have truly taken hold and become a movement when it is okay for men to be perceived as feminine. I think that's when we'll know, that famous image of Iggy Pop in a dress, and he says, I don't find it problematic to wear or offensive to wear women's clothing because I don't find it problematic or offensive to be a woman. And I think it's that idea when we stop. I think that we will have made strides in how we look at women when we can allow men to be feminine too. So my definition of feminism needs to include, like you were talking about, the energy level, needs to include men's right to be feminine and women's right to be masculine. And I think that a lot of it plays into the queer concept of fluidity in sexuality and gender presentation and gender orientation and sexual presentation and sexual orientation. So I don't really know how to sum it up, but I think feminism to me is allowing a safe space for the feminine.
I think you're right. And
whatever form that femininity takes.
Right. And then, for me, I've always felt that a good part, an important part of life is to learn how to go inside and figure out what you're into, what you believe, and ultimately how you want to treat other people. And that is not, and I always say that feminism is, in my mind, has always been about not us teaching women, but women being able to teach themselves how to not be oppressed by, maybe traditionally men or masculine energy or whatever it might be. And there's a freedom in that. And I think that it seems that women, or at least the feminine movement, seems to be by and large, progressing at a nice clip over the last 100 years. I don't know. Are you seeing that, or is it? I
mean, if you're going to take the last 100 years, hell yeah, we couldn't vote 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've come a long way. We get to vote. Yeah, we're still under the 100-year mark. And, but I would also like to talk about, so let's talk about another issue that we had at Blog Her, and it was the lean in circles. And I tweeted about some sexist comments that were made in on that idea too. You have Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook, who has this concept of that we need to lean into each other, and it's also create the sisterhood, but act more masculine and learn from the men. And this idea that to succeed in a man's world, we have to start acting like men instead of making the world have a safe space for both. And I don't think it's fair to men or women to expect this idea that to succeed in business, you have to act like a man. You have to be cold-hearted. You have to be brutal. And that's what it takes to get to the next step. And I think that we're changing that. I really think that that's coming a long way, but it's not necessarily coming that fast in these industries that are booming. Most notably, the tech industry is really feeding into that, because I have this concept that my ex and I used to talk about, is The alpha male is not the one you have to look for. He has the power. He's not looking for it. He's always had the power. He's always had the attention. It's the beta male who wants to be the alpha male.
Yes.
That's
yes.
scary. And you have an industry that is created by beta males, by kids who never could get laid in high school. And all they want to do is be that alpha male who has the money, who has the cars, who has the chicks. And this is definitely a stereotype. I'm sure there are amazing people in the tech industry, and there are lots of geeks who are not assholes. But the stereotype is that you have these really beta males who, no matter what they do, are still never going to be really cool, and they're still trying to impress people, and they still talk and geek. The geek world is so horribly full of sexism, it's disgusting. And that, there's so many strides that are being made, but it's still really scary how that exists. How Guy Kawasaki can get up and say, I don't have the chromosomes for Instagram, and think it's okay, and not think that, and use his secretary to prove he wasn't sexist. We still exist in that world. And so even though the strides are made, you just had a major snafu happen. And the lean-in circles talked about being masculine and going for it, and then use these words were like, what's holding you back? And all the words were negative that could possibly be holding me back. Whereas I was sitting at a table and someone was like, what's holding me back is my mortgage, not that I have fear over what people will think about me.
Right.
So there's still this concept that what is holding women back are their emotions, when what's holding us back is a societal structure that holds us back still.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's learning, I think it's not so much learning how to coexist in a masculine, business style environment that we've created or culture, but how to create a successful feminine or in maybe a queer-based, business structure that works and doesn't have to push against the masculine.
Yeah, fluid structure, structures that provides. I mean, think of the structure already that exists. You have the left brain and the right brain. You have the CEO, who's the creative face of a company, and you have the COO, who's the technical left brain aspect of it, running the logistics. And if you could allow for a feminine and a masculine energy in those roles as well, that could really benefit a company. You could really find, in the way that you need one person who's creative and one person who's technical, you need one person who has masculine energy and one person who has female, and that rounds you out. And it would be really nice if we could have that fluidity work its way up to the top ranks of business. I think that you would see a lot less human rights violation, you would see a lot less environmental damage, you would see a lot more compassion on both ends, on both sides, without losing that drive.
Yeah, and there's a great stereotype that I heard once from a speaker named Brian Tracy, and I just always thought this was so funny, but it's so true, and we all know it, but having women at the heads of companies, as you mentioned, and I am just going to say it the way that it's not supposed to be said, but you are going to deal with a lot less human rights violations. You don't see, traditionally you don't see women doing all sorts of white collar crime, and the jails are not filled with women who have, stolen all sorts of money or scandalized the business world. Obviously, I'm sure there are instances where that's happened, but it's traditionally
another
more.
Speaker, Martha Stewart.
Okay, so let's talk about her just real quickly. As far as energy goes, about as masculine of an energy as I've ever seen.
Doing a feminine idea. I think that's kind of amazing. She has this masculine energy, teaching feminine things. I love it. I love her. I love Martha Stewart and everything she represents. Oh, yes, you can have some serious moral issues with some of the stuff she did, but she is an example of somebody who took a really good concept and ran with it in a really smart way.
And she plays both sides of the card, which is it seems in essence a very masculine, has a very masculine energy, but is able to also display her femininity and create a pretty successful business. And I will say one funny thing, though, to the audience who obviously doesn't probably totally realize what we're talking about. Queerie and I both saw her speak in New York a couple of years ago. And there was one great question that she was asked, which I'm sure you remember, where Lisa asked her, well, what are you not good at? And There was about a good 20 Mississippi in between, and then she goes, I don't know, like something I've never tried before, and it was just such an insight into her psyche that I thought, oh boy, that part. Like, I don't know that I'd want to be your kid, but...
I don't know that I'd want to be your kid, but I really liked her speaking to the audience and telling everyone, look, I'm not ashamed to say I'm good at shit, because you have a room full of women who were told to sit down and shut up, and we're not supposed to brag about ourselves. And here's this woman that's like, no, actually, I'm pretty awesome, and here's why.
And at some point, I think it was Lisa who was interviewing her, but anyway, whoever was interviewing her had said, you know, what's your thought on being held back in a male-dominated business? And she just didn't even understand that question. And she said, I don't really know what you're talking. I created my own business. Like, that just isn't an issue.
That is wonderful too. I actually found that I was unwilling to work with the kind of company. After law school, I was looking into this world that did not accept that I was a queer woman who wrote about sex. And I was just like, well, F it. I'm just going to create my own world and my own corporation, and I'm going to create a job for me that gives me everything I want. And I have such a privilege in that I have the emotional and financial support of family and friends to do that. And I recognize that most people don't. But I think that everybody, like, instead of accepting that it has to be this way, if you made a point in not allowing that in your life, that's pretty awesome. I don't have homophobes in my life because I don't let them come into my life. I don't have sexism in my life because I don't let it come into my life. And if we all could kind of take a notch from her belt and say, hey, I'm going to create, like, if you're sitting in your job right now listening to this and your boss is going to come over and call you toots, you know, or your other person's going to say you can't have a promotion, or your kid, or I don't know. I just think that we settle so much in this culture when we don't have to. And there are lots of instances where you have to settle, but I don't think we have to as much as we do, especially as minorities. And I say, recognize you're a big deal, just like my big deal campaign I talked about last time. Like, own it. And if we owned it more, especially as voices that are having critical conversations, if we owned our right to have those conversations and to speak up, I think this world would be such an awesome place.
Yeah, my friend Bill Flynn had the best quote about settling, and this is something he had come up with, but I find it's about the smartest thing I've ever heard, just as a good practice of life, which he says, you never settle because what you end up with is less than what you settled for. Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's so true. It's so true. Every time. So, yeah, you know, like you were saying, thankfully we live in a country where you do have more freedom to create your own thing, and this isn't 100 years ago, so there's so much more opportunity, and it seems to be continuing to progress that way with a lot of, you know, the equality movements. And
the internet. The internet is just this giant equalizer, and it's amazing. It's this amazing invention. I want you to know that right now I'm just like looking at my computer with my hands out, like, you are amazing, computer, interwebs. It allows us to have these conversations in a way that town halls and standing on the center of town and protesting didn't before. It's a great equalizer. I love it.
Well, what it is it allows us access to information and experiences that other people have, and it gives us instant access to that data. So it's all of a sudden, if we want to learn about the, you know, feminism and also queer feminism and queer politics and whatever else we might not be exposed to because we live in, you know, rural, well, I live in the city of Chicago, but if we lived in rural wherever, you might not see a lot of that, or, you know, you now can access it, and all of a sudden you get introduced. You can have not maybe as direct an experience as you might have face-to-face, but you can have some of that experience. And all of a sudden now you can add that to your overall worldview, and your behaviors end up changing as a result, or at least that's what you hope.
I also think that The internet, while people talk about how we're communicating less to the people next to us, it allows us to communicate with people like us more. And so if I look down my block, there's probably not another radical queer feminist on this block. Growing up, where I live now, maybe I have a theory about the next door neighbors, but but I'm probably going to find very few radical queer feminists on my block that really enjoy pornography and analyzing it and the law. But if I go on the internet, I can search for that, and I can find people who will have conversations with me that I want to have, that I need to have. And it's this great place to converse with like-minded people. And on the other side, you can have that crazy people that, when you post a picture of your cleavage at a blogging conference, they go crazy and call you unprofessional and then take all the pictures of you and analyze how fat you are. Not that would have happened to me at all. Actually did, and it sucked. And I was like, fuck you, I'm not going to stop posting pictures of my cleavage just because you say that it's off-shaped. Yeah, my boobs are off-shaped. One's a lot bigger than the other. It's not like I didn't know this, but...
I was at the Renaissance Fair last weekend because that's what all the cool people do. They go to Renaissance fairs. Well, at least I do. But it's I always joke about it. But when I was there with a woman who's an artist, and she's very visually stimulated, and we were obviously, because that's what she does. She paints and does sculpture and stuff. And there's a lot of people at the Renaissance Fair who they dress up, and sometimes they dress up like maidens or wenches, and sometimes they dress up in the chainmail bikinis, and it's really a lot of fun. And there's some women who, everyone's body shape is different, and some women are heavier, some are thinner. And there's a lot of people who, they wear the chainmail bikini and they have a large belly, and it can be kind of jarring just because you don't normally see that, or at least here in way out in rural Wisconsin where we went, you don't see that. And I am secretly jealous of those people because they are more comfortable in their bodies than I will ever be. This idea of somebody being so comfortable that they will go against what, our societal norm of traditional beauty is and go, you know what, this is my body shape. I'm wearing the chainmail bikini. If you don't like it, I don't care. I love that freedom. Yeah. And because it's so easy to kind of laugh and go, look at that, and that's weird, and she's delusional or whatever. But the reality of it is, no, she's actually, I don't know if she's delusional or not. What I do know is she's a lot happier than I am with her body because I would never do that.
Yeah, that part of the fat movement is really great. I hang out with women who are size 18 and above, and they are so much more comfortable in their body than, I have a cousin, I love her dearly, she's beautiful, she's absolutely stunning, and the other day she was talking about how she can't wear shorts because she has cellulite. She is a stick. She has no cellulite. I mean, if she does, she has cellulite, whatever, but I have friends who are a size 28 and over 300 pounds that wear a bikini on the beach when my little cousin won't. And I think that it just all... It's funny how once you embrace that, you kind of don't give a fuck. But the fat community has taken this concept of want to have a bikini body, put a bikini on your body. And there is something wonderful of going to a place like that where you see that, and it actually makes you say, okay, well, if they can do it, I can do it. But that's sad because it shouldn't be if they can do it, I can do it. It should be I can do it.
It's just a good reference point where I can, as a person who used to find myself making fun of people like that when I was younger, and go and now I look at it and I'm actually secretly jealous of not so much their body type because I'm not a woman, but this idea of the freedom that you have once you actually accept who you are. And it's and to me I've seen the feminist. Some of the feminist principles leading people down the path of you have to get to this place where you're okay.
Yeah.
I am okay.
I don't think you are ever okay. I think that we'll never, ever fully be okay. No one will ever be fully okay with their body because there will always be doubts. And we have a, $28 billion industry that exists to give you those doubts. But there's something wonderful in saying, I'm not okay and I don't give a fuck.
Well, right, and because I'm imperfect, I'm okay. I think we're saying the same thing.
Not even that. I would say that it's about pushing your okayness. being not okay with being not okay. Like, even if you're not fully okay in that body, you're there and you're okay with that.
So I want to end because I know you got to run because you have a friend in. But I do want to end with this because this is always a fun topic, and we'll just do a few minutes on it. If that's okay.
Yeah, I have a little bit more time than I thought. Her flight was delayed, so we're good.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, bad for her, good for us. Screw her.
Right?
No, I'm kidding. Let's talk pornography because we didn't cover that. I mean, we did in the last thing that got lost. When we were talking, you had a very important distinction between pornography that many of us who are not as exposed to, when we think about pornography, is maybe tilts towards the unhealthy side, and there's a distinction between, I don't know if we want to call it healthy versus unhealthy, but certainly, I don't know, what would you call it? We talked about there being pornography that is geared more towards a particular group that is very genuine and authentic versus an inauthentic.
This may be tangential, but I'm going to tell you about my day yesterday. Yesterday,
Sure.
For my second job, as I was talking about, I work for an Coffee Brewing Company and doing events for them, and I love them because they're a really open-minded company that allows me to be who I am and has good beer. So I like working with them for that reason. And so I go to these beer fests with them, and I'm surrounded by a man's world. And there's so much. Like, the event I went to yesterday was the Hormel Black Lake and Bacon and Beer Fest. And you cannot get a larger crowd of people who watch a lot of porn than that right there. But that's actually not the reason I bring it up. I bring it up because the food presentation was pornographic. And we think of food as food porn these days, and the pictures we took, and the beer, the way, it's dripping with pornographic too. And then on the other side of the fence, you had PETA protesting with images that I would say are pornographic of animals being tortured. And both of them exist to create an arousal in you of some kind of feeling. And consuming those images does something for you. You see this image of a pig being slaughtered and you have guilt. You see this image of food and you have hunger, and sometimes you have guilt too for eating that. And we consume both physically and mentally and emotionally so much that we don't even realize in those seconds that we're looking at these images what we're consuming. In a similar way as when I had I had a pork belly corn dog that in the way that is really hurt my stomach as someone who's gluten intolerant and doesn't usually eat that much meat. And the way that hurts my stomach and hurts going through until it is out of me, and my body has to work extra hard to expel the toxins that were in that were toxic to me. When I consume toxic porn, my body's doing the same with those images. And so I like to think of buying my pornography in a similar way that I buy my food and other things that I consume into my body. I buy them from producers that I know are providing the proper resources and nourishment to their animals.
Yes.
I buy porn from companies I know that treat their workers well. I buy food from companies I know treat their workers well. I buy porn from companies I know treat their workers well. And even if it's a degrading porn, even if it's, tied up bound gangbangs, I'm going to make sure that every person who's a part of that gangbang who's being tied up and bound is there with full, complete consent. Not because they need it to pay some bill, not because they're feeling pressured by a boyfriend, because they are there because they're exploring their own sexuality. And I make a point to buy from porn companies that do that. Madison Young, Tristan Termino. You have anything that you could find at Babeline or Good Vibrations. You have in the queer world Shine Louis Houston and Courtney Trouble and Juicy Pink Box, Jinsey Lumpkin. And you have these people who are creating porn that has real images of people having sex instead of consuming this concept. It's a show for sure, but it's how do you want the photoshopped show or do you want the real show? It's still a show, but how much of it is glossed over and how much consumption is going to hurt you mentally and physically and spiritually and everything about yourself. I think you need to buy porn that's representative of the world that you want to have sex in.
So what do they say? Think globally, buy locally.
Exactly. Well, and it's the same thing. I know I buy meat from producers I know. I buy porn from producers I know. I do my research. When you go to these sites, these RedTube sites that just steal this stuff from people, you're getting poor quality porn. On top of that, you're getting viruses, and the person that you're watching does this for a living. You don't want someone to come steal from your home and I don't want anyone to come and take my computer, take my work, take my writing, and plagiarize it. That's what's happening. It's like the Napster of the world. And you think, I got free porn and I got off. But what is it actually doing to your ability to get off? What is this quick, men are assuming now that every woman wants them to deep throat them and come on their face. And women are assuming that to get men off, you have to deep throat them and let them come on your face. And they're not having the conversations. They're not seeing the things that are made before that. Jessica Drake, in an interview on Sex Out Loud Radio, Tristan Termino's podcast, talked about how they smell each other's genitals. They're looking in there before they start to make sure that they're safe. So when they don't use condoms, there's a reason. They know they're tested every 3 months. They're tested 2 weeks before every shoot. And you don't see that. So you go and watch these giant porns and they don't show everything that happens behind the scenes. And it's like assuming that your love life is going to be like a Julia Roberts film, assuming your sex life is going to be like a Jessica Drake film is not realistic. So if you can buy porn if you can recognize that and then you can buy porn that kind of mitigates that, I think that that's where you're going to have a healthier sex life.
Well, that, and there's a couple of, you'd have to Google it, but there is some famous porn, either photographer or makeup artist, who has this series, you may have seen it or maybe not, where it's pre-makeup and after makeup I think I've only seen actresses, I haven't seen actors, but
no, I haven't seen that. That would be awesome.
Oh my God, it is all of a sudden you realize that in the traditional male porn community where it's meaning men consumers of pornography, mm-hmm. the women all look absolutely perfect and their makeup's perfect and they just want everything the man wants, and these women look like normal women right before their makeup. I mean, they look like normal girls.
Yeah, you don't see cellulite on them. Why? Because they have body paint on cover.
Oh yeah.
I
mean, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this person's riddled with freckles, but I've never seen one.
Yeah.
And so it humanizes these women, and you realize, and again, we're talking about a specific type of porn that you were referring to, which is sort of the traditional male getting off to, images of women doing the things that they may or may not actually like sexually, but they do because that's what men seem to want. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, these are real people. This is kind of a production where it is people acting. These are actors.
And that not only helps you, but I think the realization that these are real people who have a real life will help you have more respect for them and then in turn have more respect for your partners. I think that we've gotten to this point where we lack respect from partners because we lack respect for porn stars, and porn is the number one way people are getting sexually educated. We have a hyper-sexualized culture that has a ton of access to sexual images, none of which are that healthy when it's free, and we have no sexual education to go with it.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think just by and large, most of the porn on the internet that's freely available is probably just, unfortunately, not super healthy for young, teenage boys who stumble across it. And it's a bummer because it puts all sorts of unrealistic expectations on the women or the girls they date at that age. And I have learned over the years that it isn't exactly like that when you're technically intimate with a woman in person in real life, that, oh my gosh, it isn't like what I what I saw, on that VHS tape that was passed around my friends when I was 13 years old. Women don't actually. I've never had anyone ask for that. So,
right?
maybe I'm just hanging out with the wrong women. But I think all of a sudden I go, oh, this isn't real. I didn't know that. I thought it was all real.
At the same time, though, you could learn a lot from porn. You could, I had a friend in high school that saw porn, and he said, "Holy shit, I had no idea that that's how a woman gets off on her clit. I thought you just kind of poked it."
Yeah. Oh, I still can hardly even find that. So I know where it is. I'm not exactly sure what to do.
Think of it as a little penis.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to hit it. You wouldn't want to hurt it hard. You want to just kind of stroke it.
I don't know that I want to think of it like a penis.
It is. Your penis developed from the clit. It is physically, it looks just like a penis with a little head. It's just this tiny little thing that grew into a bigger thing on you. It also goes around the vaginal walls, so if you can find a way to play with it in the labia, that can be really arousing too.
See, I just learned something. Now, if I could only get a date.
I have a whole article on how thinking of the clit as a penis helped me understand how to use it and how to give it pleasure, because we see phallic symbols everywhere. We understand the phallus, but the clit is this thing that's hidden and scary. So if I think of it as, okay, it's just a little mini phallus, then I could figure out how to play with it. It's on my site if you want to read it. Let's plug your site, and everyone can go leave this interview thinking about either their clit as a little mini dick or actually your dick is a large clit, to be fair.
There we go. That would be the feminist way to look at it.
It's actually the scientific way. Everybody starts with a clit, and then if your body transforms into a male body, it develops past the clit. But everybody starts with a clit.
That's true, because we all start out as women, right? And then we. That's right. Okay, so where can people find you online?
Hi, you can find me on Twitter at Queerie Bradshaw, or if you'd prefer the more PG-13 version, at Lauren MF. And I run QueerieBradshaw.com, QUEERIE Bradshaw.com. I also run CreativitySquared.com, where I teach online writing classes, including how to write about sex.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Of course, this
for
was so
another.
Much fun. This might have been my very first radio interview.
Well, you should not feel in any way special.
Next is Terry Gross. I'm so excited.
Well, now that's
the stop. Bloggers are weird. Terry Gross.
I will push you out of the way to be interviewed by Terry Gross. So that no, I won't ever be interviewed by Terry Gross. But you could. I could see you hitting a little NPR.
One of my big goals in life is interviewed on Terry Gross's show.
You know what you should do is you should write a piece for This American Life. I could absolutely see you doing that.
That would be fun.
Yeah, you could meet the great Ira Glass.
Yeah, if only I liked This American Life.
You don't like it?
I know. I feel like I have to be shot for that. I even worked at public radio for a while, and I couldn't get behind anything on Saturday or Sunday. I just turned it off.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
On that note,
on that note,
people, even though I don't like This American Life.
No, that's okay. But anyway, you should definitely be reading QuerieBradshaw.com, and you're launching a podcast of your own.
I'm so excited. So please listen to that when it launches.
And that will be available on your website as well, right?
Correct.
Perfect. All right. Well, Queerie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
fun.
Okay, we'll say goodbye.
Bye.